The house stood at the very end of Willow Ridge Lane, a place where no one dared to walk after sunset because the old wooden building looked like it was breathing. Slowly, as if something inside was alive and waiting for anyone foolish enough to step closer. The walls were cracked, the windows were fogged from the inside, and the wind made a strange whisper every night, like a voice calling for help, or maybe calling someone in. People in the town said the house once belonged to an old woman named Margaret, who lived alone for more than 40 years, and no one ever saw her speak to anyone. She never came to the market, she never visited neighbors, and when children passed by her house, they always felt something cold brushing the back of their necks, as if invisible fingers were trying to pull them inside. The strange part was that after Margaret died, the house seemed even more alive and more dangerous than before. One night, a group of friends from out of town decided to investigate the house because they had heard too many stories about it, and they wanted to record a video for their channel. So they parked their car near the dead end and slowly walked toward the gate, and each step felt heavier than the last, as if something in that house already knew they were coming. The front door was half open, as if someone had been watching them from inside. The moment they entered, they felt a wave of cold air hit their faces, and the house smelled like wet earth and something rotten. The walls had long scratches like someone had been dragged across them, and the floor creaked under their weight. They turned on their flashlights, and the beams shook in their hands because they could feel a strange vibration in the air, like a heartbeat echoing through the wood. As they walked deeper, they saw a rocking chair in the corner, moving slowly back and forth, even though there was no wind around it, and the chair kept rocking until it suddenly stopped, as if someone invisible had just stood up from it. Then they heard footsteps coming from the room above them, soft, slow, dragging footsteps, like an old woman walking with broken feet. One of the friends whispered that maybe they should leave, but the others wanted to see what was upstairs. So they climbed the staircase, and each step made a groaning sound, like the house itself was warning them to turn back. At the top of the stairs, they saw a dim hallway with a single door at the end, and the door was shaking as if something behind it wanted to come out. They walked toward it, and the closer they got, the colder the air felt. Their breath turned white, and the sound behind the door got louder. It was like someone scratching the wood from inside, slowly, painfully, like they had been scratching for years. Finally, one of them pushed the door open, and what they saw made their flashlights flicker and their hearts almost stop. Inside the room was a small bed, and on the bed was the shape of an old woman lying perfectly still, but her shadow on the wall was moving. Not calmly, but twisting as if it was not human. And the shadow slowly turned its head toward them, even though the body on the bed did not move at all. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, and the room shook as the shadow began crawling across the wall toward them. And in that moment, they finally understood why this house was feared for so long. Because Margaret never left. She was still here, and she was still waiting.
The room grew darker as the shadow crawled across the walls, twisting, stretching, moving like a creature made of smoke and hunger. The friends backed against the door, trying to push it open, but the handle felt frozen, like it was being held from the other side. The air became heavier. Each breath felt harder, and a low whisper filled the room, sounding like the voice of a very old woman calling their names, even though they had never met her. The figure on the bed still did not move, not even a little. The body looked dried, pale, empty, like a shell that had been left behind for decades. But the shadow on the wall kept growing larger, its hands stretching long and thin, with sharp, crooked fingers reaching toward them. One of the friends lifted his flashlight, and the shadow hissed as if the light burned it, but the bulb flickered and almost died, as if something was draining the energy from it. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the room. The bed shook, and the shape of the old woman slowly began to rise without bending the way a living body should. It lifted straight up, as if pulled by invisible strings, and the shadow on the wall moved in perfect sync with it, as if the shadow was the real body and the figure on the bed was only a puppet. The friends finally managed to force the door open, and they stumbled into the hallway, breathing fast. The house trembled behind them as if angry that its visitors were trying to escape. They ran toward the stairs, but the steps they had climbed just moments before now looked twisted and longer, as if the house was stretching itself, trying to trap them inside. A deep thumping sound came from the walls, like a heartbeat getting faster, louder, stronger, and the lights from their cameras flickered again, casting strange shapes around them. They rushed down the stairs and almost reached the bottom when the rocking chair from before suddenly slid across the floor, blocking their path like someone had pushed it with great force. They turned toward the living room, hoping for another exit, but the windows were now covered with thick black cracks crawling across the glass like moving veins, and the whispering voice of the old woman echoed through the air, telling them to stay, telling them they were chosen, telling them she had waited too long. Then one of the friends noticed something horrifying. The shadow had followed them, but not on the walls anymore. It was now stretching across the floor, moving like a dark wave, sliding quickly toward their feet. They screamed and jumped away, but the shadow was fast, faster than anything they had seen, and it wrapped around one friend, pulling him backward across the floor toward the stairs. His hands clawed at the wood as he begged for help, but the shadow tightened around him, dragging him upward. The others grabbed his arms, trying to pull him back, but the force was too strong, and the old woman's whisper turned into a long, low laugh that shook the entire house. The shadow lifted their friend off the ground and pulled him into the darkness above as his screams faded into the upper floor, leaving only silence behind. The remaining friends stood frozen with terror, realizing that once you entered the haunted old woman's house, you did not leave unless she let you, and she was not finished with them yet. The house fell into a deep, unnatural silence right after their friend was dragged upstairs, a silence so heavy it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. The two remaining friends stood trembling, their flashlights shaking in their hands, and every instinct in their bodies screamed for them to run. But their legs felt weak, like something in the house was feeding on their strength. They forced themselves to move, carefully stepping around the rocking chair that still blocked the way to the front door. The chair twitched slightly, as if responding to their movement, as if something unseen was sitting in it and watching them with cold, hungry patience. They tried to push it aside, but it would not move. It felt heavier than stone, like it was rooted into the wooden floor. A faint cry suddenly echoed from upstairs, the same direction where their friend had been dragged. The voice sounded distant, almost muffled, like it was coming through thick walls, but it was definitely him. They looked at each other, knowing they could not leave him behind, even though every part of this house told them that going back up would be a fatal mistake. Still, they gathered their courage and moved toward the staircase, which now looked darker than before, each step covered in long black shadows, like fingers waiting to grab them. The temperature dropped sharply, their breath turning white as they climbed the steps again. The house groaned with every move they made, the boards bending as if reacting to the weight of fear pressing on them. When they reached the top floor, they immediately noticed the hallway was different. The walls seemed closer together, the ceiling lower, the air colder, as if the house was changing itself, shaping the halls to trap them deeper inside. Faint whispers drifted from every direction, not in one voice, but many voices, all sounding old, broken, desperate, and angry. They felt like the voices were trying to push into their minds, sinking into their thoughts. They followed the direction of the cries, reaching the same room where they had found the motionless old woman earlier. The door was open now, swinging slowly, as if someone had just walked through it. But the inside of the room had changed. The bed was gone, the walls were covered in long, dark stains that pulsed slowly, like veins, and the shadow, the one that had dragged their friend, was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, a cold hand touched one of their shoulders. They spun around, but there was no one behind them, only the long hallway stretching into darkness. Their flashlight beam flickered, then caught movement at the far end, where something was crawling on the ceiling, its limbs long and twisted, its head turning unnaturally as it moved closer. And the whispering voices grew louder, echoing through the walls, merging into one terrible chant. They backed into the room, their hearts pounding, but the door slammed shut behind them, sealing them inside. The window shattered without warning. The wind pushed in, carrying the smell of old, rotten wood and something else, something metallic and bitter. Then they heard a voice, the same voice of the old woman, but clearer now, as if she was standing right next to them. She told them she had waited for years. She told them she needed souls to feed the house. She told them that once someone entered, she would never let them leave. And then the floor beneath their feet began to crack, splitting open, as if the house was opening its mouth, ready to swallow them whole. They grabbed each other, trying to stay balanced as the wooden boards shifted and tilted. Deep darkness growing beneath them. Something moved inside that darkness, something breathing slowly, waiting to pull them down. And they realized their time was running out, and if they did not escape now, they never would. The floor kept splitting wider, and the darkness beneath them shifted like a living pit, breathing in and out with a slow, heavy rhythm, as if something ancient and hungry was waking up. The friends pressed themselves against the wall, trying to avoid falling into the widening gap, but the boards under their feet twisted like they were alive, bending upward and downward, trying to shake them loose. A low rumble echoed through the entire house, the sound of something massive moving below the foundation, as if the house itself had a spine and it was stretching after years of sleep. The whispering voices grew louder, blending into a single, long moan that crawled through the air and across their skin. The temperature dropped even more, freezing their breath and numbing their fingers. One of them tried to force the door open, but it was sealed shut as if welded by invisible hands. The wood felt warm, pulsing like it had blood flowing through it. Suddenly, a sharp claw-like shadow shot across the floor, grabbing his ankle. He screamed and kicked frantically, trying to break free, but the shadow tightened around him, pulling him toward the hole. The other friend grabbed his arms, pulling back with all his strength, their bodies pressed against the shaking floor. The shadow dragged harder, stretching longer, thicker, like it was fueled by their fear. The entire room trembled, the walls bending inward like lungs breathing with the house. The friend being dragged felt something cold crawling up his leg, like icy fingers searching for his bones. He felt himself slipping closer to the edge of the darkness, and he screamed for help, his voice cracking with terror. The other friend used a broken piece of wood from the wall, swinging at it the shadow. The piece passed straight through the darkness, but for a moment the shadow recoiled and loosened its grip just enough for the friend to pull himself back. They stumbled away from the hole, breathing hard, but before they could recover, a voice whispered behind them, so close it felt like cold breath on their necks. The voice said, "Do not run. You belong to me now." They turned slowly, and there she was, the old woman, standing in the corner, her body bent, her head low, her hair long and tangled, hanging like ropes, her skin gray and wrinkled like dried paper. But her eyes were black, empty, and shining with hunger. She glided toward them, not walking, not touching the ground, her feet hovering slightly above the ground. The shadows around her twisted like snakes, following her every move. She raised a hand, and the entire room shook again. The bed that had disappeared earlier suddenly reformed from the shadows, rising slowly from the floor. The old woman pointed at it and whispered, "Rest now. Your time is over." The friends backed away, but the room stretched longer behind them, as if the doorway was drifting farther and farther, like the house was swallowing distance, making escape impossible. The old woman kept coming closer, her face tilting in unnatural angles, her mouth slowly opening wider and wider until it looked like a black tunnel pulling the air toward her. The shadows crawled across the floor faster than before, wrapping around their feet, their legs, climbing higher and higher like living ropes. The whispering voices filled their ears, telling them to stop fighting, telling them to give in, telling them it was easier to surrender. With one final burst of fear and desperation, they pushed against the shadows, yanking themselves free, and grabbed a loose wooden beam from the broken floor. They struck the wall with all their strength, hoping something, anything, would break. And to their shock, the wall cracked open slightly, revealing a thin sliver of moonlight from outside. That tiny light weakened the shadows, making them shrink back like smoke fading in sunlight. The old woman hissed, her voice sharp and hateful, shaking the boards beneath their feet. The friends struck the wall again and again, widening the crack as the old woman rushed toward them, her mouth opening wide enough to swallow their screams. The crack opened into a small hole, and they squeezed through it, tumbling into a narrow hidden hallway they had never seen before. The walls here were made of old stone, cold and dripping with water. The air felt strangely quiet, safer for the moment, but the whispers behind them were growing again. Louder, angrier. The secret hallway stretched into darkness, with only a thin line of moonlight guiding their steps. The stone walls were damp, and the air felt ancient, like this place had not been touched for 100 years. Behind them, the whispering voices rose again, growing sharper, angrier, echoing through the cracks of the house. The old woman knew where they had gone, and she was coming. They moved quickly, their footsteps splashing in shallow cold water that ran along the floor. The passage twisted left, then right, then sloped downward as if leading into the heart of the house. The further they walked, the colder it became, until their breath looked like white smoke drifting in the air. Their flashlights flickered, but did not go out this time, as if the shadows were weaker here. Suddenly they reached a wide chamber, hidden deep beneath the house. The ceiling arched above them like an old cathedral, and the walls were covered in hundreds of handprints, all small, all old, pressed into the stone like marks left by people who had tried to escape long ago. In the center of the chamber stood a wooden pillar, twisted and blackened, like it had been burned by something not human. Around it circled a ring of bones, arranged perfectly, as if part of a ritual. The moment they stepped inside the chamber, the whispering stopped completely, replaced by a low, continuous growl that vibrated through the floor. A cold wind rushed past them, and the old woman appeared at the entrance of the chamber, her body floating, her eyes filled with endless darkness, her mouth opening wider than before. The shadows behind her poured into the room, moving like a swarm. She told them they had come too far. She told them this was the heart of her house, the place where she fed, the place where her power lived. She stretched her hand toward the wooden pillar, and the shadows swirled around it, tightening like a vortex. The bones around the pillar began to rattle, rising slightly as if lifted by invisible strings. The friends realized then that the pillar was connected to her. It was the source, the anchor, the thing keeping her spirit bound to the house and giving life to the darkness. If they could destroy it, maybe they could weaken her enough to escape. The old woman moved closer, her shadow spreading across the chamber, the air tightening like invisible hands squeezing their lungs. The ground shook as she screamed, a scream that sounded like 100 voices crying at once. The chamber walls cracked, the handprints glowing faintly like trapped souls waking up. With every ounce of courage they had left, the friends rushed toward the pillar, grabbing broken pieces of stone from the floor and slamming them against the wood. It shook, but did not break. The old woman roared, her shadow arms stretching out, trying to pull them away. They struck the pillar again and again, splinters flying through the air, the ground trembling harder. Finally, the pillar cracked, a long, jagged break running all the way down its twisted frame. The old woman shrieked, her voice shaking the entire chamber. The shadows recoiled, pulling back like they were in pain. The friends struck again, one final blow, and the pillar shattered into pieces, collapsing in a burst of black dust that scattered across the chamber floor. Instantly, the shadows around the old woman sparked like dying embers, and then faded. Her floating body fell heavily onto the stone, as if all power had left her. She crawled forward, reaching toward them, her voice now thin, weak, trembling with fear instead of anger. She begged them not to leave her. She begged them not to let the darkness fade. But the shadows dissolved around her like smoke, losing their shape, and her body slowly turned gray, brittle, breaking apart like old ashes until nothing remained but a faint outline on the cold floor. The house groaned from above, the ceiling shaking, stones falling as the entire structure began collapsing, the walls cracking open like the house itself was finally dying. The friends ran back through the hallway, the moonlight growing brighter, guiding their steps. They climbed upward through another passage, pushing through a rotten wooden door that burst open into the front yard. Cold night air hit them, and they stumbled into the grass, the house behind them shaking violently, windows shattering, dust pouring out from every crack, and in one final sigh, the haunted old woman's house collapsed inward as if the earth swallowed it whole, leaving only ruins and silence. The night became calm again, the wind soft, the moon bright, and the whispering voices finally gone. They stood there, exhausted, shaking, alive. They looked at each other, knowing they would never speak of this place again, and as they walked away, the ground where the house once stood remained perfectly still. No shadows, no whispers, no old woman waiting in the dark. They had escaped. But deep underground, in the hidden chamber, one faint handprint slowly faded from the stone, as if someone trapped for years had finally been released. The end.
Dear listener, today's story ends here. If you never want to miss any of our chilling horror stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now. And if you enjoyed this tale, please like and comment. Your support inspires us to bring even darker and scarier stories for you. Stay with us and stay brave.